Hey guys, and welcome back to another weekly webinar. I think I'm slightly on the wonk, but I'm going to roll with it anyway. And I'm not going to lie, this one is going to be 20 minutes again. I attended the Menopause 101 seminar delivered by a GP and menopausal specialist and a coach, kind of similar to myself, but she's done like a deep dive into becoming like a menopausal specialist in her own right. And I was on this webinar again for an hour and a half, and what I'm going to try and do is sum up everything that I learned and everything that you might need to consider or need to know about into about 20 minutes. Again, with another good visual, just to make it super clear. And again, I'll take a picture of this as we go in. So I just want to preface this by saying, you know, potentially not everyone in the group, or definitely not everyone in the group at the moment, needs to potentially be thinking about menopause. However, it's inevitable. We are all going to go through it at some point, and the rates in which early menopause or early onset menopause are increasing are going up year on year on year on year. Women in their 20s, 30s, really kind of super early 40s, when the average age technically is 51, give or take. So it's heading left. A lot of it is due to medical interventions and treatments, things for things such as cancer and things like that. But it is still something that can happen, and inevitably is going to happen to each and every one of us. So that's the case. Why not get a little bit clued up on it, enjoy the sun, listen to my voice, have a watch of this video for 20 minutes, and hopefully you might pick up a few things when you then put it next to last week's video on the cycle to just understand being female a little bit more. So, as I've already said, it is inevitable. Symptoms tend to last anywhere between a year and 10 years, and the average age of menopause itself is 51, okay? Of menopause itself, that's going to become key in a second. The common symptoms that we'll all hear about hot flushes and night sweats. They are the two most common, but there are many more that we'll go through quickly as well. And then it's understanding the difference between perimenopause and menopause. So perimenopause is the stage at which you go through before menopause, and that's when really all your symptoms come. Okay, so perimenopause is that symptom period whereby you might be going 3 or 4 months without a period, then you'll be getting one that, you know, comes through. You might go 8 months without a period, then you'll get one that's come through. If you're really unlucky, you'll go 11 months without a period. You will definitely curse and swear. You'll have one come through, and you keep going through that kind of stage, experiencing symptoms that are completely individual, okay? Nobody's menopausal journey is the same as somebody else's. So what is menopause if perimenopause is all of that? Well, technically, menopause is one day, and menopause is the day in which it's been a year since your last period. And that is when they class it as, okay, you've gone through and you're now at menopause, okay? And then we go obviously into the time thereafter. So a lot of the symptoms and a lot of the anxiety and the nerves about what is to come and how to get around it will come through that perimenopausal phase. Menopause itself is the day in which it's been a year since your previous period, and you can class yourself as moving through that perimenopausal phase and then into postmenopausal literally the next day. Hence why menopause is one day and one day alone. In terms of symptoms, obviously I've mentioned hot flushes and night sweats, insomnia, brain fog, anxiety, weight gain to a point. We can disassociate a little bit of that kind of simple notion of calories in, calories out, because there was a little bit more hormonally going on, a little bit of a shift in where we're storing body fat, things like that, the way that we're breaking things down, our BMR drops. There's a few things going on that will contribute, along with a potentially unfavourable calorie balance, to weight gain, mood swings, more consistent, you know, in terms of just anatomically, like vaginal dryness, things like that. There's loads of different symptoms. The main two or the main ones that I've experienced coaching, have been insomnia, hot flushes, night sweats, and generally anxiety, but also not necessarily weight gain, but the stubbornness or the difficulty in which it seems to be to start to get body fat from dropping off. We have to be a little bit more switched on, a little bit more patient, a little bit more careful with our calories and things like that. So I've found it a little bit more that it's a case of the process I would expect to work at X is actually working a little bit slower, and we need to be a little bit more careful with it. So in terms of menopause itself, this diagram I'm hoping will kind of give a really good overview as to when I then go through kind of medical and lifestyle things. So on this curve, this is kind of everybody is plotted somewhere on this curve. 25% of women will experience minimal symptoms. 50% will have manageable symptoms, and that really actually does relate back to last week as well, where, you know, some women have periods that literally run like clockwork, don't even affect them, they come and go like the wind. And then there's a group of us in the middle who fit into that. It will change by a few days here and then every month. We'll have a few days where we've got some kind of symptoms, some PMS symptoms, but it's manageable within our day-to-day life. We maybe tweak a few things within our lifestyle, potentially medically, there's maybe paracetamol, things like that you use, but you can get by. And then there are, you know, another percentage of women who really struggle with PMS symptoms. And again, we find that similar curve through the menopause. So 25% minimal, 50% manageable symptoms, and 25% debilitating. Now, when they said debilitating, they really went on to reinforce that, and more so perhaps than what they did the previous week regarding the menstrual cycle in general. Really intense, and you know, they gave a couple of case studies whereby women were coming to them suicidal based off of symptoms that hadn't been diagnosed as menopausal symptoms, not knowing what to do about life, you know, feeling like, you know, they didn't want to be near their husband, they had no energy, they couldn't sleep, they were trying to hold up a corporate job, working all the hours under the sun, and just literally drained of life because all of their hormones had picked up and sodded off. And it's super crucial that we live and operate with a balance of these hormones, because we saw last week, again referring to that cycle and the way that it peaks and troughs, the effects that the higher level hormones have on us, and then when they drop off, those PMS symptoms come in. Imagine just that permanent drop off, bang. Every now and again you get a spike, then you get another drop off. Every now and again you get a spike, you get another drop off, then your period disappears for life, and you're left literally hormonally empty, trying to work out how to function as a human being. And one of the things that they said that really resonated with me was, in the 1900s, the average lifespan of a female 100 years ago, which really isn't that long ago, was 45. So women didn't need to know how to live without estrogen. They didn't need to know how to function without a stable baseline of hormones going, you know, operating around their body. We just didn't need to know. And in that 100-year span, we've gone from living to 45 to living to 85, 87, and spending half of our life potentially trying to work out what the hell we do without estrogen, which is where obviously treatments such as HRT and things like that have come in. But I'm going to touch on that in a second. So if you take nothing away from this webinar, just think about that basic fact for me, that 100 years ago we didn't need to know how to live without these hormones that are essential to our bodily function. Now we're spending half of our life, or a good 30% of our life, living without them. So we need to know how to do it best. So that brings me back to here. And what we've got underneath this chart is we've got lifestyle ways of managing it and medical ways of managing it. And what you can see by these arrows is, generally speaking, at the minimal end and early end of 50, a large part of how you manage it will come from changes that you can do within your lifestyle. And if you flip it the other way to that debilitating end and back towards that 50, a large part of how you'll manage the menopause will be medically supported, but lifestyle plays a part, and medically can still play a part at this end too. It's not one size fits all. You can't have, it's not that you can't have HRT if you have minimal symptoms. If HRT, for example, would improve those symptoms, then a medical intervention has its place. But they would more than likely suggest looking at some lifestyle factors based on, you know, seeing a GP. They'd probably suggest looking at some lifestyle factors first, seeing if you can gain an improvement in quality of life that way, things like that. So it's a kind of never-ending spectrum where you can fall anywhere within it, and it might change as you go through your journey, which is just the craziest thing, because fundamentally, I've written it down here, it's one big hormonal roller coaster. So medically, main kind of treatment is hormone replacement therapy, HRT. I'm going to cover that in more detail in a second. Generally speaking, everything medically will be done kind of clinically. You'll go and see your GP, you'll get prescriptions, things like that. There shouldn't be, if you're 40 or above, or I think it was 40 or above or 45 or above, there's no need to test for menopause. You don't need to go and buy a Boots menopause test. You don't need to spend money in knowing if you're in the perimenopause or going through menopause. There's some really key symptoms that they can track, and then they'll clinically diagnose you as going through the menopause. And then from there, as I said, it's an amalgamation of these two parts that see you through those 20, 30, 40 years of getting those hormones as balanced as you can for the rest of your life. Lifestyle-wise, one thing that they really touched on, especially for active women, and obviously I'm speaking to you guys as active women, was moving away from a fixed mindset. So if you train 3 times a week now, and you start really noticing that some symptoms for this kind of jack up and things start moving quite quickly on the menopause front, you need to be able to move away from that fixed mindset of I train 3 times a week, I train CrossFit, I train weights, I only do this, because your body cannot stay in that fixed mindset in terms of everything that's going on physiologically. You need to be able to move into a part of your life where you can look at your training from a growth and open mindset. If you're feeling good, yeah, let's do some weights. We know we want to try and keep weights in one way or another. I'll touch on that in a second. But if you're feeling, there's no other word for it, completely, utterly shitty and zero energy, you have to be able to listen to your body and not beat yourself up because Tuesday's a training day. Because it honestly cannot be sustained that way going through perimenopause and the symptoms. Specifically more so, obviously, if you're plotting at this end of the graph, might be a bit more manageable here, and you could probably stay relatively fixed in your mindset. But what I think they were getting at here is you have to be able to step outside of your body a little bit at this point in time, step off the roller coaster, acknowledge the fact it's a bit of a hormonal roller coaster, and then go, okay, I was meant to do heavy 5x5 deadlifts today, but getting out of bed was hard. I'm just really struggling with menopausal symptoms today. Maybe it's a walk and some movement, some pelvic floor work. Maybe it's not 5x5 deadlift. I'll still go to the gym, but I'll just work in rep ranges of 10, less strength output needed, and I'll give myself short rests as I go through. You know, it's doing things like that. It's understanding it doesn't need to be a flat no, but it probably can't or won't always be able to stay exactly what is prescribed that day, and you have to be able to give yourself permission to listen to your body. That was literally one of the things they hammered home every couple of minutes. You need to be getting your athletes, you need to be getting your clients to understand they need to listen to their body and communicate that with you effectively, because there will be changes day to day. Diet is, you know, a crucial one at this point in time. We know we're kind of metabolizing things a lot slower. Protein, we want to be keeping hold of as much muscle mass as we absolutely can for our strength, for our shape, for our confidence. So diet plays a huge part. I'm going to link movement and cardio together. The biggest women actually jump up to the same risk as men once they go through menopause of suffering a cardiac disease or a cardiac arrest. So obviously we tend to associate males more so with cardiac death, especially 40 and above. But the moment you go into menopause, you get to a similar risk level of cardiac disease as the equivalent age in men. So it's super, super important, and I really don't want this to scare you guys off of menopause, but super important to keep that heart health, that lung health, overall movement just as good as you possibly can, understanding how it fits in with how you're feeling and things like that at the moment. And the one other thing they touched on was understanding your relationship with food, specifically alcohol, sugar and caffeine, because they start to affect your body slightly differently. A lot of women perhaps not twigging they're starting to go through perimenopause might start not medicating but looking for an outlet in alcohol of an evening to try and help them sleep. It's just going to bring about night sweats and things like that a lot more. It's going to increase anxiety. It's going to do all the things it does anyway to somebody that isn't menopausal, and it's just heightened when you're menopausal. But that doesn't mean to say you can't drink. You just have to start looking at things as a slightly bigger picture. So for me, straight away, I know, okay, probably wouldn't touch it in the week anyway. I don't tend to, so I'll avoid that as I avoid it in my 20s and 30s now anyway. But I obviously do drink a lot of caffeine. So I'd probably have to look at my relationship with caffeine a bit, maybe reducing it, maybe looking at decafs, things like that, and leaving alcohol very much for like a weekend or a special occasion and things like that, just to make sure that we're not increasing the way that we're feeling those symptoms, because we're trying to live a happy, healthy, fulfilled life that isn't overtaken by symptoms. So it just means, unlike men, we just maybe have to think about a few more things as we age. So yeah, really, and working on your pelvic floor was also another one that they reinforced, whether you've had children or not. Working on your pelvic floor as an athletic female is super, super important. It's going to help prolapse. It's going to help with kind of rigidity instead, and how, I can't remember the name of the muscles. It was a really small muscle within your, just above your uterus, I think it was, that balances where your bladder sits, and that just relaxes, meaning your bladder relaxes more. And then obviously that's when you can have that urge to need to go for a wee, or potentially not being able to prevent yourself from needing to go for a wee and things like that. So working on your pelvic floor pretty much from my age up is something that we should all be doing as females, regardless of children, regardless of age, regardless of where you are in that perimenopausal journey. So I hope, I'm going to touch on that in a second. I'm going to move on to HRT, and it is still, and it will continue to be, the first line of treatment that your GP will go to, specifically if we're struggling somewhere on this curve. It's used to help stabilise your hormones. So it's trying to minimise the roller coaster effect of estrogen. So it's giving you back estrogen to stabilise it. It's then going to give you progestogen, because with stabilising your estrogen, you're still going to be lining your uterine wall, and it just won't stop if there isn't any progestogen in replacement of progesterone to help you clear and break down that uterine wall. So it's going to give you that to help protect the things that estrogen's designed to do that we don't need it to do anymore. And then testosterone for energy, libido levels, because it isn't just a male hormone, we need and utilise testosterone as well. So they're where it's going to be focused on, and depending on kind of your symptoms and things like that, the makeup of it, the type of HRT might be slightly different, but you guys will know that that isn't for me to go into. That's going to be a GP that's going to be able to trial different types of HRT with you and understand which one might suit you more. Now, if me saying HRT has put the fear of God into you because there was a study released and it was potentially thought of for a few years that HRT led to an increase in strokes and cancer and all sorts of things that obviously we want to avoid increasing our risk of in any way. it was disproved. That study's been disproved for a number of reasons. It used an old version of HRT that is no longer, HRT isn't built that way anymore. And it also was tested on a group of women who were 60 plus, who had already gone through perimenopause and technically had already gone through menopause. So what they were doing was spiking up a bunch of this way after the fact that you need to try and stabilise it, and you need to try and implement a strategy in which to support the woman through menopause, starting it in your 60s. And the type of HRT that they tested on at the time has basically just since been disproved that actually that study, the findings of it can't be relatable, and you can't sit there and state those facts that were so-called kind of derived from that study. So it's been disproven, and it will continue to be and is the best medical intervention for supporting us through menopause depending on our symptoms. And it's going to help us with our bone strength, because we're going to be able to keep estrogen and things like that in our body, which helps with our bones. So we're looking to try and offset any potential risk of osteoporosis, which we know is prevalent within women. It's going to help with our muscle mass, muscle strength, brain health, generally balancing that weight fluctuation that you can get a little bit with menopause in general. I know a lot of people say I went on HRT and then I gained a lot of weight. We're looking at then, obviously, depending on where you are in your cycle, we're changing a lot of your hormones. We could be going into that water retention phase and things like that, if you link it back to last week's webinar. So it's not as simple as HRT made me gain weight. And it's not as simple as weight is fat, because we know they're two very different things. So in terms of taking HRT and being prescribed it at the right time, it can support in balancing those weight fluctuations and changes that can happen with going through menopause. Skin health, brain clarity, and things like that. And the GP turned around and said, you can be on HRT for as long as you see positive effects from it. So there's no like, okay, you can only be on HRT for 5 years. It's if it's keeping your symptoms and keeping, the key thing is hormones controlled, and it's prescribed at the right time, and your GP works out the right one that works for you, that's going to keep us stabilised through those years that our body's, still getting used to the fact we're alive without estrogen, we're alive without progesterone, things like that, okay? So it's prescribed for as long as you're feeling positive effects from it. So, breathe, Beth. That's the menopause. There's so much. I had 12 pages of notes, and I've tried to put it onto one whiteboard and not try and scare the hell out of you. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. But what I would say is, let's go back to how I run Willis Fitness, how I run my coaching. If you can control it, you can change it. If you can change it, you can improve it, okay? We can't control the fact we're going to go through menopause, okay? We know, scientifically speaking, it should start creeping up 40s upwards, potentially more like closer to your 50s. So we know roughly when it's going to come. We don't control, to a degree, how our body's going to react in the system and the symptoms that might present themselves. But what we can control is, once we know roughly where we sit, lifestyle, medical, do we need to get onto HRT? Start experiencing aches, pains, irregular period, all sorts of things like that. You need to be going to your GP, and you need to be having this conversation. You need to be saying, for the last 6 months or 3 months, this, that and the other, I'm finding myself sweating at night just a little bit more, and now I've got an irregular period. Is it the start of things? Start speaking to your GP. Start creating a journal. Just get a notebook, a couple of lines, symptoms, how you're feeling, energy, training, food, and just start tracking things, because again, what gets measured gets managed. So we can just start to, put in a little bit of work, effort, hard work, put in a little bit of effort in the onset of things starting to develop. you know, like calling a GP, getting an appointment, tracking a few symptoms, seeing what's going on, so that you've got a picture that you can step back from and go, okay, cool, I'm going to tweak that a little bit. Yeah, right, I think I'm going to need to go on to HRT, tick, tick, tick. Be patient a little bit, let things settle down, and then chances are you can ride through, you know, relatively unscathed. Remembering that, again, we're living longer and we're trying to find a way to live when our hormones naturally decide to bottom out, and we need to work a way to live and control them. Okay, so yeah, that's menopause. I hope I haven't scared you. If you think you need to speak to your GP based off of this, let me know. We'll have a private conversation about it, because your GP is the expert on this. But otherwise, you could look to go to the British Menopausal Society website. People like Dr. Hannah Short, who I had on the podcast, that's one to go back to. That's an hour and a half nearly of menopause questions, what to expect when menopause is kind of coming round. So watch this, go back to that podcast. I've now got, you know, over 2 hours worth of content on the menopause that you can listen to, absorb. You can go away and ask questions. Got access to a private clinician like Hannah that you can book in with if you need to, or you can go down your GP route. But it's about controlling it, changing it, improving it, and living your best life.